I'm glad you joined me this morning. I'm going to show you how to make dyes for your clothes or for your ribbons or for your yarn with natural products, things like plants that you have in the backyard. We have some here in the front that we have taken from the collection. You can dye with coffee. You can dye with goldenrod. You can even dye with flowers. And you can dye with some things that you have in the kitchen. This I dyed the other day with turmeric, which is a spice that you can find used usually in things like curry, but you can find it in the grocery store. It's really easy to do natural dyes, and I think you're going to have a lot of fun. These dyes have been used for thousands of years. The dyes that you see in clothes in the stores today really only started being used about 100 years ago. The plant dyes have been used up to 20,000 years ago. So they had to find out each one and see how it worked. You'll do the same thing. And this is nice because you're not only doing art and having fun, but you're also doing a little bit of science. Most of the great discoveries started with, I wonder what would happen if I did. And that's where things come from. So let me show you the things that we need to get started with. You'll have some in your packages as you've picked them up from the Antiquarian Society. And you probably have these other things at home. Very first thing you need is protective gear. Wear gloves. Unless you like having purple hands for the next 3 or 4 weeks, this is very important. You should also have an apron. Dyes are usually there for life. You'll need a pan, and you'll need goggles. You don't want to splash something and get it in your eyes. Most of these wouldn't hurt you, but it still can be a very painful experience. You will need a pot, big pot. I sometimes use ones that are twice this size, but this is good for doing things at home. And you'll notice it has 2 handles. We use ones that have 2 handles because if you pick this up, it's heavy. If you have 2 handles, it's much safer for you. You're also going to need either tongs or a spatula, because once you have your dye in here, and whatever you're dyeing, if it's a shirt or yarn, you have to stir, and you have to be able to lift it out. I like tongs myself, but some people prefer the spatula method. The other thing you have to keep in mind is that you must use natural fibers. This is wool from a sheep. That's all that's in it, just wool. This is 100% cotton. You can buy this at the store. Either of these will dye very well. If you try and do something that does not have natural fibers, you'll find that you can't get the dye to stay with it. It just beads up and falls off. Now, the other thing you're going to want to do is get a little notebook, because if you make a really special dye and you forget how to do it, you'll never be able to get it again. So keep notes. This is what I used to dye with. This is what I used as a mordant, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And this is what I was dyeing, and this is the color it gave. Very first thing you want to do is to wash your yarn or your shirt, whatever it is you're going to dye. And you wash it, you put in warm soapy water. I have soap flakes here. I took a bar of soap and grated it up. but you could also use Dawn dishwashing liquid. Now, if you've got your warm soapy water in here, you can take your yarn or your shirt. Here's my shirt. And when you are washing, you want to just squeeze so that the water and the soap get very thoroughly into the yarn or the shirt that you're doing. Once you've done that for about 5 minutes, you can pour that water out. You can run the material underneath a warm stream of water from the sink. Just make sure all the soap is out. Now you're ready to dye. All right, now you're going to start your dye pot. Usually when I'm out collecting things in the garden, I use a bucket. And just put it all in there until you have probably 4 or 5 cups of plant material. Use a scissors, chop it into little pieces. That makes it easier to get it into the dye pot. Once we have it all chopped up, we're going to take our pot, and you always do it at a 2-to-1 ratio. So if you have 1 cup of, say, blueberries, which makes a very good dye, you will use 2 cups of water. And depending on how much dye you want, it's always 1 cup of plant material to 2 cups of water. So it could be 1 cup of blueberries and 2 cups of water, 2 cups of blueberries and 4 cups of water. Remember, it's a ratio, so there's a little math involved here too. Once you have the materials all in there with the water, make sure they're all pushed down, and then you're going to boil it. And you can boil it until all of the color has come out of the plant material. You'll see the water start to change color. It takes a few minutes at first, but you can keep it in and boiling as long as you don't put any fiber in it. Just keep the plants in there first. Once it's as dark as you want it to be, use a sieve or a colander and take out all of the plant material so all you have is the colored water. Now, before we go any further, we're going to talk about mordants. And mordants started out as a French word meaning bite deeply. It helps the colors to get into the yarn or the shirt that you're doing. You don't have to use mordants. If you do, make sure that you only use a small amount. I generally don't put more than a tablespoonful in a pan this size. If you put in too much alum, it will make your garment or your yarn greasy, and nobody likes greasy yarn. So we've got our dye pot here. We're all boiled up. We're ready to go. You put in your, where did I put my yarn? You put in your yarn or your shirt, and you want to lower the temperature at first. Make sure that this has been soaked in water that's just a few degrees below boiling. So you can have this ready on the side, sitting in a pan of water, or run it under hot water as you're doing it. You want to make sure it's really, really wet. Once it's ready, you put the material into the dye pot, and you bring up the temperature. You don't want to boil. You want to keep it simmering. Simmering is a low boil. You see tiny bubbles around the edges, but it shouldn't be large bubbles. You know what boiling looks like. Leave it in as long as you want. You can get it any color any darkness that you want. It can sometimes, for different plants, take a long time, so be prepared to wait. And, of course, you're going to use I've lost my tongs. You're going to use your tongs to make sure it's stirred, and you can get all the color in that you want. You can use this dye pot more than once, so you might want to dye yarn the first time. And then you take the yarn out and you rinse that off under the sink in the same temperature water. Always keep the same temperature, and I'll tell you why in a minute. You can put in another item or another ball of yarn. What you'll get is the same color but lighter. This and, where is my yarn gone? This and this could be from the same dye bath. The darker one was in first and took up more of the plant material, plant dye. This one would have been done later and makes a lighter color. Mordants. Mordants we use here. Alum is safe. You can, if you want to have copper or iron, use the iron pan or pot as your dye pot. So it isn't necessary to have one that's nice and shiny. If you have an iron pot, you will get a certain quality of color. It's usually not as bright. It tends more to gray. If you use copper, the colors can be very bright. This could easily have been done in an iron pot. Alum will also brighten your colors. It is non-toxic, which is why we use it. There are other mordants that you can use, but they tend to be very dangerous, so we're not going to use those. We may do another more intensive natural dye video later, but this will do for now. So you have mordants, and they can be put in. You can either put your yarn or your shirt in them before and make sure that they are just the same temperature as the dye pot. You can put the alum into your dye pot, or you can use an iron pan or an iron pot or a copper pan or a copper pot, and that would be your mordant. Or you can leave it out altogether. First time you're dyeing, you might want to just try it and see what colors you get. Once you've found out what kind of colors you get, you can say, I wonder what would happen if I put in some mordant. Try it and see. And remember to keep good notes. When you have taken your yarn out of the dye pot, you want to run it under water that is the same temperature or very close to the same temperature as you had in the dye pot. And the reason you want to do that, particularly with wool, is if you shock the fiber, what will happen to it is it'll become felt. It will no longer be nice simple pieces of yarn, it will be felt. And we try and avoid that. It sort of limits what you can do with it. These are some things that you can use to dye with. You can dye with the beet juice that you cook the beets in. You can dye with coffee. You can dye green with spinach, purple with blueberries, yellow with marigolds, and onion skins can give you several different colors. A regular onion skin would give you yellow. A red onion skin will give you purple. And goldenrod. Goldenrod we have in most of our gardens, even if we didn't plant it. There we are. This is marigold, which is also goldenrod, and marigold will give you the same general yellow. You can modify that by using mordants, or you can dye it twice. If you wanted to get green, you might dye it yellow first, and then you could dip it into a blue dye later. That would give you 3 different colors from 2 dye pots. This blue, I know this isn't a very professional thing, but I was soaking black beans last night. You know, the dried black beans you can get at the dollar store, and you can put them in Mexican food. Black beans, the water that you have soaked them in, gives you blue dye. Who knew? It was another one of those, I wonder what would happen if I did this. So, have fun. If we can help, we will. And I will talk to you another time.